And so she tells me that. She says to me, you know, hey, my friends said, I don't even know your last name. And she goes, yeah, so what is your last name? And here's exactly how I responded. I said, well, tell your friends that my last name is Pemberton. And one day that's going to be your name too.
Ooh, gay. Hello, guys. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you, Arvia.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, party people. I want to introduce you to Tonya and Steve Pemberton. They are my dear friends and they are amazing. Of course, I'm going to say that because they're my friends, but they've been married for 26 years. Tonya is now a stay-at-home mom, but she's also a yoga instructor. But for many years, she worked in education. She's got her master's in education, went to Rutgers, and then did pharmaceutical sales and a variety of things. She became a stay-at-home mom when her children were in elementary school, when they moved to Chicago. We'll get into that. Steve went to Boston College. He got his undergrad and his master's from Boston College. He's had a variety of roles in HR. He's also worked in the admissions office. His last corporate job or corporate role was WorkHuman as Chief Human Resource Officer. But more importantly, you guys, he is the best-selling author, and he's got two amazing books. You've got to read them. One is called A Chance in the World, and the other one is called The Lighthouse Effect. And we may get into this during the podcast, and they've got three amazing children, but I did want to share this with you. So let's just get into it because I know you guys are very eager to hear their story. I love the story about how you guys met. I don't know which one of you guys want to tell it, but it's a good one.
Well, you know, like most stories of meeting, there's two versions.
I was going to say, do you want his version?
We'll start with her version, and then I'll come in and fill in.
It was the summer of '95, the first time we met on Martha's Vineyard. And it's a little scandalous.
Party people, did you hear that? It's a little scandalous.
Oh, it's so funny. Well, we met the summer of '95, and we met briefly on Circuit Ave. I remember the song was Mary J. Blige and Method Man. And my girlfriend, remember that song? Yeah. I forget the name of it, but my girlfriend was singing the Method Man part. And one of Steve's friends says, oh, that's a good girl right there. And so there was a group of girls and a group of guys. And we just started talking. And Steve was next to me, but I was engaged. And so his friend was trying to get his attention. And he was pointing to, my ring finger and going like this to tell Steve to cut it off. And so I laughed and I said to Steve, I said, your friend is trying to tell you that I'm engaged, and I said, but it's so nice to meet you. And that's all I said. And I walked away from him. And I said to my girlfriends, I said, we've been coming up here for years. I've never met anyone. And doesn't it figure, now that I'm engaged, I meet this great guy. And that was it. That was the summer of '95.
So summer of '95, you meet Steve, you think he's great on Circuit Avenue, but you're engaged. Nothing happened then.
Nothing happened. No, nothing happened. I left, but I knew I had been engaged for 2 years and I had not planned the wedding. So it was one of those things where you date for a long time. You think you should get married, because he's asking. You think it's the next thing to do. I was young. I was 24, I think 24, 25. And so that summer, I ended up breaking off the engagement because I just knew it wasn't right. I was like, I could marry him, right? He's got the right resume, but something in my heart was like, this is not right, So thank God I followed my gut. And fast forward, summer of '96, we're in the Vineyard again. And there used to be a club out by the airport called Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And so we were there and my girlfriend noticed him and said, T, I want to go meet that guy over there. And I turned around and it was him. And I was like, oh my God. And I said, Sean, I know that guy. And she's like, oh, well, I'm going over to talk to him. She's like, he's fine. I'm going to talk to him. And I was like, wait, before you go over and work your magic on him, I'm like, let me just go see if he remembers. And so I went over to say hi. And I was literally staring a hole through him because I was so shocked that it was him. And I said, I know you. And this one goes, oh, you do? Like, Like,
That's
you
why
know
there's two
me,
versions,
right?
because we'll get to mine here in a little bit, I'm sure.
And so
Yeah.
I was like, oh. So I looked at him, and in my mind, I was like, oh, okay, so you're one of those guys. So I backed up, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm mistaken. And I turned around and walked away because I was just like, oh,
You were
forget.
done. But party people, you need to hear this. It was a year later.
It was a
They
year.
were in a club. They had only met briefly on Circuit Avenue. But there's the other thing that I think that's really important in the story. Tonya walked up to Steve and said hello and said, "Do you remember me?" And one of the things that you guys aren't doing these days, connecting in person, having the confidence to walk up to someone and say hello. I really want you guys to start doing that because it builds resilience. Because yes, Tonya, he didn't respond the way you wanted him to initially, but
Yes.
were you devastated or were
No,
you
I
just
was
like,
crushed. I was crushed, but I had to I had my game face on. So I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, you know what? I must be mistaken. And I just turned around and walked away. And I didn't get but 2 steps before he grabbed my hand.
So here's a slightly different version, right? Because there's always two versions to this. I do that first time in summer of '95. We talked for only 5 minutes. And as she walked away, I remember literally saying to myself, the man marrying her's really lucky. And I didn't think anything more of it. She went her way, I went mine. And a year later, we're in the same place. And I do notice somebody staring at me. And she's so beautiful, it's throwing me off. So every time I kind of glance in that direction, and then she starts walking over to me.
I was shocked that it was him because I was like, I mean,
Yeah.
I told my mom about him when I had met him the year before. But we didn't ever exchange numbers. And I remember my mom saying in the fall, why don't you call that guy that you met in the Vineyard? She was like, you said he worked at Boston College. And I said, Mom, I'm not calling him. I'm like, well, I'll look like a stalker. I'm not doing that. So I was so shocked to see him in the Vineyard the next year.
But when she comes up to me a year later and she says, I know you. So here's exactly how I was thinking. I was so thrown off that I'm like, how does somebody this beautiful know me and I don't know her? Because she leaves an impression, and she always has. She's not somebody you forget. And it was true then, and it's true now. So that's what I was thinking. I'm like, how in the world does somebody this beautiful know me and I don't know her? And so, but here's where I messed up. I'm so taken aback that I'm like, you do? But it doesn't come across that way. It comes across like, oh, you do, huh? Like everybody knows me. And
More
that's
like Rico Suave. Like,
yeah, which is not my personality at all.
Next.
So, fellas, so what happened? I fumbled a little bit. All right, I fumbled a little bit. All right, that's okay. You fumble too, but check out the recovery now. I hope you're taking notes. You need to take notes. This is. I don't think they're ready. So listen. So I'm thinking, man, you got to remember. Like, think. And now I'm saying think as she's walking away. She's walking away. And I also know she's pissed as she's walking away. And I'm like, think, man, think. And I'm like, this is the woman that I met for 5 minutes the last summer. That's who this is. So I walk up to her and I touched her lightly and she whipped around and she gave me that look like, So, and here's what I did. I immediately put my hands up. I said, my fault. I said, I remember you now. We met last summer on Circuit Ave in Oak Bluffs. We talked for 5 minutes. You're from New Jersey. Your name is Tonya, but your friends called you T. When we were meeting, your hair was pulled back, which is why I didn't remember you. You had on a light blue Parker and yellow shorts, and you were standing to my right when we were talking. And when you walked away to my right.
He does have an incredible memory. He does. And the first
thing, so attractive.
Isn't that funny? And he did say when he grabbed my hand, he said, "Did you get married?" And I was like, you do remember. And that's
Yeah.
when he went through everything. He's
Great,
like, you had
greatest
your
recovery
hair
ever.
pulled
I'm
back,
just
you
saying.
had your
I'm just saying.
sweatshirt on,
Greatest.
you know.
She did something really important though, and this is as
Okay.
much to, well, it's both men and women. When she says to me, she's right before she walks away because she's upset. Not, I mean,
You
not
can
visibly
tell I was
angry.
upset,
No,
though,
not
right?
visibly angry, but she was like, "Oh, you one of them guys." And but what she did something really important. It was very subtle, but she lightly touches me on the forearm and she says, "I must be mistaken," and she walked away. And what she was doing in that moment was establishing the line of dignity and respect. And now that was not how I was feeling her at all, but she thought it was. And so she said, "Hey, no, there's a respect line here, right?" And it was a subtle thing to say, "I must be mistaken," but it was really saying, I'm not. So yes, I am approaching you and I am coming up to you, but I'm doing so in a way that don't think I'm coming at you like, I don't have any standards, morals, values, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. To be clear, you didn't say, "Oh, I can't believe you didn't remember me," and start rolling your neck. You were
Right.
like, "Oh, I must be mistaken." Because party people, if she had responded that way, I don't think we'd be talking to them right now.
No, but it got better. Believe it or not, it got better.
Tell us. Tell us.
So now, you meet the second time, and it's loud bumping music, and we can barely hear each other. We said, let's go outside. So we walked outside, and we were talking, and spent a few more minutes that night talking. Now I realize at this time a couple of things. Number one, this time around, I'm the one who's engaged.
Oh my gosh. I know. It was so scandalous. Yeah.
He was
I did not realize it. No, this is the first time I've heard this part.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh, I
Yeah.
can't believe we never told you that.
No, I did not know this.
Girl,
Yeah.
it was something.
So
Yes.
she was engaged the first summer, and now I'm engaged the second summer. However, here's what I'm thinking, and it was quasi panic in that moment because I can say this comfortably and confidently. All these years later, I know immediately she's the one. Now I'm engaged to somebody else, but I know she's the one, and because one, I had remembered her from a year before, a 5-minute conversation, right? But now I'm engaged. Now I can't tell her that. I can't tell her that, right? The rest of the time, though, she's on the Vineyard. I'm like, "So where are you going to be tomorrow?" She's like, "I'm going to be on the beach." I was at the beach. When we were on the beach, I said, "Well, where are you guys going for dinner?" Because she was with all of her girlfriends from New Jersey. Said, "Oh, we're going over
Going to Lola's.
Going to Lola's."
Yeah.
So I showed up at Lola's.
He sure did. Showed up.
There was like 8 women sitting around the table, and I pulled up a chair like, boom, how y'all doing?
Like, what is he doing?
But see, here's the point.
You go after it.
She was the
Yes,
one.
you're
I
right.
mean, I knew she was. I knew like she was the one, and there was a prevailing I thought that I had at the same time, which is okay. Now at minimum, I know that I really like the determination she had made a year prior. Yes, I'm engaged, but a person can be a good person. Like two people can be both good people, but not necessarily good for each other, right? And so you can't marry somebody because you feel an obligation to them. It's got to be this kind of meshing and matching. But here's what happens. Her friends, every time, this is a girls' trip, and every time they're hanging out, I show up. But I don't really give a damn what they think because I don't know them. And besides, if I think she's the one, I can't let her get away, right? Can't let her get away. And her friends, which we all laugh about now. So we're talking for a period 24, 36 hours, beach, restaurant. And she says and her friends start hating.
Oh yeah, this was after 2 days. Yeah, because every time we go somewhere, Steve is showing up, and they're like, "Listen,
Party people, you need to be concerning yourself about blockers because blockers are going to exist. Don't even get me started about the blockers. And I'm glad, Steve, that you were able to work through it.
Yes,
Oh no,
well,
no.
and I was feeling him, right? I was enjoying
Yeah,
the
but
company.
sometimes women can be a little
Well,
irritating.
and we were young. We were in our
Yeah,
mid
yeah.
20s, and so my girlfriend. Well, you say she's giving me
So
static because I was like, oh, I hope I see him
her
today.
girlfriend, and we love her now. I mean, our
Yes,
kids
I
call
mean I've
her
always loved
auntie,
her,
you
but
know,
yes,
so the friendships have remained. But her friends make a very good point to her, actually. Now, I know I'm feeling a certain kind of, like annoyance from them, but I didn't care. And so friends make a good point to her. They say, that you spend all your time talking to that guy and you don't even know his last name. And so she tells me that. She says to me, hey, my friends said, I don't even know your last name. And she goes, yeah, so what is your last name? And here's exactly how I responded. I said, well, tell your friends that my last name is Pemberton. And one day that's going to be your name too.
Ooh, game.
Told y'all weren't ready for this. Y'all weren't ready.
Game.
I'm just saying, that number one, that's the greatest line in the history of dating.
Game. That is
I'm just
game.
gonna put it.
You know what, young men? You can all utilize this line like tomorrow when you meet your person.
Well, with a couple of conditions.
yeah, you gotta mean it, right?
One, you better mean it.
That
You never
part.
say that to a woman if you don't mean it. And number two, if it is as effective a line for you as it was for me, I want an invitation to the wedding. I want some credit.
Why did you feel like you could not tell Tonya you were engaged? And when did you tell her you were engaged? Because that's kind of a little.
I did not tell her like immediately in that first conversation, right? But in those conversations, the next day, she was telling me that she had ended her engagement. And I started asking her, because even before meeting her, I knew this is not the kind of thing that's meant for a lifetime. So I began asking her, I'm like, well, how did you deal with that? How did you end it? Because you know that ending is going to hurt that person. I said, so I'm engaged. And I think that was important because we were not talking about a relationship between the two of us at all. Now, I can tell you I was feeling something, a real magnetism and a chemistry, but at the same time, I couldn't betray my own dignity, if that makes any sense. And I
Absolutely.
didn't want to hurt the person that I was engaged to. There was an integrity thing that I had to have.
Absolutely.
So nothing unfolded between us that second time around. What did happen, and I knew this, that I had to end that engagement. Because there's no way that somebody should be walking into my life like that and just upsetting it. But I knew, okay, so this is the person, right? It was almost like this nudge of saying, all right. And then I think subsequently, though, what happened, and I didn't know this, and if I didn't know it, she made sure that I knew it. Like I had to close that relationship before I could even have a conversation with her. Like there was just no, and yeah, it was my own standards of manhood, dignity, decency. But that was the kind of woman she is. That, to be blunt about it, this is not the kind of woman that you run games and play games with. So I remember thinking, you got to come to her whole and correct, and make sure that you everything is tight in your world. That you put an end to this relationship because it's not right for the two of you, and then you go say, okay, I'm ready.
I remember our conversations on the beach, and it was because it was a period of a long weekend that we met. It was the 4th of July weekend,
Awesome.
and then this time it was 1996, and so I, saw Friday. Then he, came to the dinner. I think I saw him Saturday at the beach, and we were talking on the beach, and we were just establishing this great friendship. And one of the things that I was falling in love with was that he was just asking so many great questions and detailed questions and really thoughtful. And I was comparing him to the other guys that I had dated. And I thought, gosh, these are such insightful questions. And he was saying, like, well, how did you know you didn't want to get married? Well, what was it? And how did you end that? Because, I know it was hard. And so for the first time, I was telling somebody,
Oh, love
how
this.
difficult it was to crush someone else's heart. But I said to him, I remember saying, I realized that when you marry someone, you have to marry them because it's what you want and not because it's what they want. It's not, okay, this is next, because we've been dating for
Exactly.
a couple of years. And so then it was that day. So we had known each other for 2 days. And then it was that day that he had said, or 3 days. And then he said, I'm engaged. And I was crushed. I didn't want him to know I was crushed, but I was like, oh my gosh. And I said to him, I was like, well, that's hard. And I said, at minimum, I've made a friend, I think we'll be great friends. And I said, if things don't work out, call me, here's my number. And that was it. And then a month later, I went back to Jersey. He went back to Boston. And a month later, he called and said, I'm coming to New York. I'd love to see you. And he said, I'm not engaged anymore. I broke off my engagement. And I was like, well, as long as you're in the free and clear, we're good.
And
So,
the rest is history.
yes, that was it. That was it.
And how much longer did you guys date before you got married?
Oh, we got married quick.
Yeah, from that second time meeting, we were married less than a year.
Yes.
Less than a year later.
When you know, party people.
Yeah.
When you know. There's a couple of lessons in this. And it's not even about being engaged, but it's about the practice of dating, the practice of commitment, the practice of being in a relationship. They were both ready and they got married within a year of that second meeting because they both knew exactly what they wanted. It was very clear that they were each other's person because they had experienced other people and they knew. So I want to encourage you guys to continue to practice being in relationships, practice being committed to someone. Every single person that you meet, it doesn't have to be, or every single person that you're possibly considering to be in a relationship with, it doesn't have to be, I'm going to only be in a relationship because someone I want to marry. That should not be the criteria. You guys need to practice dating. Don't you guys think our young people need to practice dating?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that part of that is part of practicing dating is understanding where you're aligned and where you're not. I mean, immediately when we began dating, probably within the first, because it was a month later, right? It was at the end of August that I came to Jersey. There was something that I asked her, and then she in turn asked me. It was a question I think that everybody can ask, and they should ask. And it remains a question that we will periodically ask. And I think this question, if you ask it, it can help you understand exactly whether or not there is a true, chemistry and connection. But you have to be honest when you answer. You got to be honest. And the question is, what matters to you the most? What matters to you the most? So I asked her, what matters the most to you? And she said, I have to be number one in your life. I have to be number one. Now, she didn't mean like above God. She didn't mean it that way, but I knew exactly what she meant. Like I have to be, and I understood too that, her dad did not put her number one. And so she resolved that she wasn't going to have any man in her life who was not going to be able to do that. Right. And so that's being transparent. Now that can be, there's a certain vulnerability in answering that question honestly, but that answer cannot be judged. So I can't, and when she says I've got to be number one, I have no say in that. She's telling me what is most important to her, that I have to be number one in her life.
Right. And you can receive it the way you want to receive it, but that is her truth. You didn't have to stay in the relationship.
Right.
That's her truth. She shared it, and then you could do with it what you wanted. But yes. I think that's so important.
And then she asked me the same thing. And I said, I do not like anybody trying to control me or dictate my path. And that too is a certain kind, I can come across a certain kind of way. But I had a set of life experiences. She had a set of life experiences that leads you to that answer. And I do think that that's periodically something that you have to ask, because as you go through different stages in your life, your career and marriage and children, like that's a question that you have to, that you do have to ask, because they can change. What matters to somebody at 25 can be different than what matters to them at 35. And that could change with their partner and they don't even know it. But again, it can't be whatever that answer is that comes back. You cannot judge that. You can't judge it. And if that person says, well, I want to be in the clubs on Friday night and hanging out, and I know that might seem like, but you can't judge that if that's what he says. You can't judge that because that's what he's saying is important to him.
Right. And you know what? Don't ever try to change someone. When they tell you what's important to them, they mean it. So please don't try to change people, party people. Believe what you hear and take it for what it's worth.
And don't try to change, Harvey, don't try and change what is important to you just to try and make something work. Because ultimately, over time, that gets exposed. And you have to talk about that. You have to talk about that when it comes to dating and how you spend time on the weekends and finances and marriage and children and intimacy. I mean, you have to talk about what those things are, and then you decide, okay, so where do we mesh here? And then when there's conflicts or the potential for conflicts, like over finances, for example, then okay, when we answered that question about what mattered, we weren't on the same page. But that's something we know we're going to have to work at if that's the case.
Right. I think being on the same page is so important, because if you're not, small things over time become big things.
Yeah.
And if you're not on the same page, then, if you don't set your course to the same destination, then I remember reading one time that, like, if you're traveling from LA to DC and you chart your course, but you're 1 degree off, you're going to end up in Baltimore. But if you're going from LA all the way around the world, you're going to end up in South America. So if you have your sights set on this very happy marriage and you're a degree off over 30 years, it's not going to be very happy. So we just try and take
great advice. Great advice. I love that. That's great advice. Let me ask you, how old were you when you got married?
27.
And Steve, you were?
30.
Hear that, party people? 27 and 30. We're not waiting till we're 35 and 40. Just wanted to share that. It's interesting. I say that because, our young people are growing up in a very different time with, the digital age, dating in the digital age. They have online dating apps. 1 out of 2 relationships begin online. They've got social media, they've got so much more noise and confusion, and they're just not as confident and resilient as we were when we were younger, when we were navigating the dating landscape. We had to work harder. We were used to being rejected. We were very comfortable going up to men. And Steve, you were obviously very comfortable going up to women. We were very comfortable introducing ourselves, saying hello. We had game, all the things. And we're trying to help them relearn some of those skills. And I think it's happening. Slowly but surely. So party people, I don't know if you know this, you probably don't, but Steve Pemberton grew up in the foster care system at 3 years old. He went through a lot, and basically he should not, based on the data, he really shouldn't be here today. A Black man growing up in the foster system. He's written 2 best-selling books, and he is a very successful executive in corporate America. He speaks all over the country. Steve, tell us about how you were able to overcome that with Tonya's help. And Tonya, you can chip in too, because, your story is not, this is a one-off, in my opinion. And people need to, there's a lot we can all learn.
Well, what I came to learn is I had inherited this generational cycle of family separation and addiction. So I was orphaned, taken from my mother when I was 3, a couple of weeks before Christmas. I never saw her again. My father was murdered 2 years after that. But the truth of it is that they were gone from me long before then, because they had come into the world as inheritors too. So my father was orphaned. My grandfather on my mother's side was orphaned. My mother died at 40. My grandmother died at 40, as did her mother before her. So, I was really just, the next cycle up. And believe it or not, things got worse after that, because I'm in the foster care system in these dark, violent, very, very difficult homes. And I spend the entirety of my childhood in those homes, kicking, clawing, scratching, fighting, just trying to find why this had happened. And I was also trying to find at the same time my family. So I'm fighting these two battles. On the one hand, I'm trying to solve the mystery of my identity, because I don't know who I am, and I don't know who my mother and father are. And more importantly, I don't know where they are, because I was too young to know what had happened to them, and nobody will tell me. And at the same time, I'm trying to fight these families off who are taking me in for money. And they live in these worlds of guile and deceit and manipulation. And so, there's a certain juncture where it looks like this cycle that I have inherited that is going to continue, because how could it not, right? How could it not? And yet, it hasn't. And I think there's a lot of reasons, for that. One is I was resolved, even as a young boy, that I was going to defeat this family. That was my mission. I was going to defeat them. And the way I defeated them in my mind was to be really, really good in the classroom. So I knew I was smarter than they were, and that helped me. So no matter what labels they tried to throw on me, and God knows they tried everything: worthless, dumb, ugly, something about you isn't right, nobody wants you. I grew up with those messages. But at the same time, I'm in the classroom and I'm doing so well. I'm winning spelling bees. I'm in the talented and gifted program. And it brings these people into my life who bend the arc of my life. And so they were the lighthouses for me that allowed me to get to college. A woman who brought me books when I was living in this one foster home. A high school teacher who takes me in 3 days after Christmas when I literally got nowhere to go. I'm 16 years old. I had nowhere to go. I've been watching my social worker calling families, all day, trying to get somebody to take me in. And, Ari, when something like that happens to you, it sends you a very clear message. You have no place in the world. You haven't done anything wrong. I hadn't committed any crime. I hadn't done anything, that deserved that. But there I was. But I remember in that moment, vividly remember it, especially this time of the year, holidays coming, all that. And my reaction to being in that situation was not pity, and it wasn't despair. I remember saying to myself, do whatever you have to make sure that this never happens to you again, where your life is dictated to you by, a series of desperate phone calls. And so in my mind, in that moment, it was like, I'm never going to let that happen again. And it never has. I get to college. And, the irony about going to college, especially for a lot of young people, when you go to college, you breaking away from family in a way, right? Finding your own path. I was still trying to find family. So my birth name was Steve Klakowitz. That was the name I carried all through college, because I didn't know my real story even then. So I had these voids. I had these voids of damage that had been done, scars, loneliness, and yet at the same time resolve that I've got to. This wasn't my fault, but it was still my responsibility. And maybe that's not fair to ask that of anybody. And so when we said earlier how I knew it was her, right? Because there's this 100-year story I've come from: loss, addiction, separation, family narratives, right? So, and then I've got this years of just relentless negligence by these foster families. So that's on one scale, right? That's on one scale. And then she comes along and puts something else on the other scale that outweighs all of that. That outweighs all of it. So that's how I knew it was her, because everything up to my life had been at that point fight, struggle, despair, desperation, and in some cases darkness. And then this light comes along, and that's how I knew it was her. That's how I knew. And I think that whisper, that's God's whispering to you. That's God whispering to you, saying, listen, I know that you've dealt with some tough things. I know it's hard. I know it is heartbreaking. But I'm whispering to you that he is this person who's going to make this all right for you. And you just have to follow that.
Oh my gosh, that is beautiful. You know what, Steve? Instead of you taking something that was so awful, you have totally been a lighthouse. I mean, with the books that you've written, the stories that you've told, I've heard you speak numerous times, even on this podcast. You inspire me every time.
Wow.
What would you tell a young Black man or any young man that is growing up without a father or has grown up without a father, that is growing up in tough times, but still has all of the smart,
Yeah.
college, but probably still has that story in their head, like, am I good enough? Am I good enough?
Yeah.
What can you share with them to help them to get through it and get to the other side?
Well, one of the first things and I wish somebody had told me this as a young boy, especially because we're having this conversation in the midst of Adoption Awareness Month, and I wish somebody had told me that I was a superhero. And I would have said, what do you mean a superhero? Like, what in the world are you talking about? And I wish somebody had said to me, Steve, like, did you realize that just about all the superheroes that you know have one thing in common? They were all orphans. Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, Wonder Woman, Black Panther, Jane Eyre, Harry Potter. I mean, you can just keep going. I would have looked at myself like completely differently to realize, like, wait a minute, I love Spider-Man. I'm like, wow, that's a commonality, right? And I say that to say there's a reason for that, because adversity, struggle, challenge does give you a skill set, actually. I saw what happened to my father. Now, I didn't know him and didn't meet him, but I knew, because he was one of the top amateur fighters in the world, there's a public record about his life. And his friends in particular and his family filled in the voice. I saw what happened to him. And it was a death of despair. That he had inherited some very, very difficult challenges. He wasn't a bad guy. He had some bad things happen to him that he wasn't equipped to handle. And I wish that somebody had said to him, hey, Kenny, you're 21 years old, and you've got this great talent with your hands, and you're about to become a father with a woman you have no relationship with. And you're 21 years old. And I wish that somebody had said, Kenny, that's God whispering to you, understanding that you have lost a lot in your childhood, but here's this little boy who can help you set your life on a very different path. And had he heard that message, then I think the arc of his life would have been different. I would have had some memory of a father. What I would say to the young men, one, there's some things that they're not your fault, but they're still your responsibility. I think we get manhood twisted a lot in this society, like, bravado and, yelling and screaming and blinging and all of that. And I meet a lot of people who have that definition twisted. For me, I decided consciously that I was going to be what I never had. So the void of what was lost will always be with me. I'm never going to know what it's like to have a father like the way that people have that person that they even know, or even good or bad. There's just a void there, right? But what healed that? What healed that was, that's what I'm going to be to my children. Right. So nobody can bring that to me, but I can bring that to them.
It brings me to tears thinking about it. It's just you're watching you with your children, the two of you guys, with the three of your kids. It's just so beautiful. And to love and be loved is a beautiful thing. And I know you are loving on them, giving them all that you did not have.
They
So
were
beautiful.
healing, but I also think it means, you have to risk, because Arvia, I remember being afraid of her, and when I say afraid of her, I don't mean in the way that most people might think, but up to that point in your life, you had suffered so much loss, and to put your heart out there like that, and to suffer the possibility of another loss was very difficult for me, because up to that point, I was able to say to the people I dated, I don't need you, because there was some truth to that, right? I had navigated that. I was like, listen, I don't need you, kind of thing, which is immature thing to say, by the way, at that time. But I could not say that about her. So that fear, though, that a lot of men do absolutely
Well, let's
feel
talk
like,
about this. Let's talk about this.
well, to put your heart out there like that and to worry about it being broken is a fear that men do have but don't often share, because it's at odds with all the manhood narratives, right? Of vulnerability and all those other things. But what's over on the other scale is regret.
Party people, hold on, Steve. Did you hear that? It's regret. What's on the other end of the scale if you don't take that chance. We talk about rejection all the time. And I know it's hard and we know it hurts. But if you don't take that chance, look at this beautiful marriage that they have.
The regret part is, I remember saying, this is different. This is risky. This is risky. Like, you just met her, right? This is risky. But I remember the emotion that was greater than the fear was, if I don't find out where this can go, I'm going to be 70 years old thinking about her, saying this is the one I let get away because I was not willing to risk. So I think that to live is to experience loss and get your heart broken. I mean, that's just, nobody navigates this life without it. But, to love again is a triumph of hope over experience, because experience says, don't do that. I don't want to go through that again. But when you risk, then you realize, okay, I learned something from that. And it is a triumph, actually. So, yeah, there's a certain vulnerability. There's a certain kind of willingness to dare it all. I have not, I've not regretted a single moment of it. Like, never. I knew from everything that I thought in those first 5 minutes, I'll put it this way, everything that I thought could be in the first 5 minutes. No, actually, that's not right. I got it wrong, because it's been greater than that.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Tonya. You know what? Y'all are killing me. Are you feeling the love? Party
I'm
people?
feeling the love, girl.
I'm feeling the love. It's coming through over here. They have me in tears. Tonya, let's talk about, I want to understand now, Steve, obviously grew up very different than you, coming from foster care. Was that a concern? Like,
Great question.
So, when I met Steve, and especially for the second time, when I met him the first time in 95, I knew he was special. And like I said, I walked away. I said to my girlfriends, all these years we've been coming here, because I've been going to the Vineyard since college. And I said, I've never met anyone. And doesn't it figure, now that I'm engaged, I meet this great guy. But we hadn't exchanged numbers. Fast forward the following year, we connect. And I knew by the end of that weekend, at minimum, I made an incredible friend. And I mean, if you asked me, I would say to my girlfriends, oh, he's the one. Like that one, he just grabbed my heart and ran with it. And it was everything about him. It was his confidence. It was his awareness. It was his ability to pay attention to details. I mean, he would know if I was upset. He would know if I was upset about something before I even voiced it, just by the way I stood, he would look at me and he'd say, what's bothering you? And I'd say, what do you mean? And he was like, well, I can tell by the way you're standing because your foot is turned to the left and I'm like, you, but like I'd never met anyone like him. And so on one hand, my heart was just falling, but then he tells me that he's engaged. And so I'm like, okay, well, handle your business. And when he came to New Jersey and we started dating, I was madly in love with him. And I remember my girlfriends saying, are you sure about this guy? And I said, I love him. And they said, yeah, but he grew up in foster care. You don't really know, like, what kind of dad is he going to be? What kind of husband is he going to be? The guy that I was engaged to was a banker and, he was, on his way to being established. And Steve and I were dating, I was a first grade teacher and Steve worked in admissions. Like literally we had 2 nickels to rub together, and
building together, party people.
Together. And so my girlfriends were kind of like in my ear, like, girl, come on. Like, because they were always looking for like that perfect resume, like no fault to them. That was like the age that we were in at the time. And I said to them, I said, you know what? We could be in a 1-room shack. And as long as he's by my side, we're going to be just fine. And
that part.
That's what I went with. And I just knew, I knew, I think what young people need to understand is that there's so much beauty and power in vulnerability. In this day and age with, social media and everything is perfect and everything has the filters and everybody's life looks like it's picture perfect. It's not sustainable, right? Like you have to be real. You have to open up your heart and trust that when you open it up and share it, it's going to be taken care of. And your partner will do the same thing with you. What I try and tell young people, I say to the girls, I'm like, girls, if you're going to share your body, you got to share your heart. Like these young people just jump right into relation or situationships, but then they don't want to tell the guy how they're feeling. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, you shared everything else. Like, let's switch it around, right? Like open up your heart so that's protected, right?
Exactly.
And then what comes after is even more beautiful. So yeah. So to answer your question, no, girl, I went all in and never looked back.
There's so much that our audience is, I'm sure, learning from this. But another nugget that just came through, and I know I mentioned it a little bit when you said it, but you guys building together. I mean, Jason and I built together too. I mean, he probably made $2,500 more than I did. We were in our 20s when we met. We weren't the way we're living and what we have, and I'm sure the same with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
This was not. We have way more than we ever imagined.
Yeah.
Our relationship was built on love and respect and support and our values. And I think when you have that, you can do anything. The power of partnership.
Right. And believing in each other, right? It's all about like, I can say he is my biggest cheerleader, right? And I hope he would say that I'm his biggest cheerleader, I'm whatever it is, and it hasn't always been, big bonus checks and houses on the Vineyard. It hasn't always been that way. Like it was the one thing I can say about Steve, because we're very different. I was raised in a family. I had a great mom. I had a great dad too. He just had other priorities, let's say he was, but Steve was always a planner, and he approached our marriage that way. He was that time in foster care when he said, I never want to be in that situation again where my fate is at the hands of somebody else. And so when we got married, I was a teacher. He was in admissions. We didn't have a lot of money, but what was important to him was that we were always saving. And I was like, I was not a saver. I was like, well, I want that bag. I want this. I want that. And honestly, our biggest arguments were over money and time because I was always late. And isn't that funny? I was always late and I would spend his money. Like we shared our money, but then remember we had those our weekly accounts where we could like go get pizza or coffee or whatever. And he was so good because he would always save his. And at the end of the week, if I was out shopping, I would go and I would take out my money and I would be like, oh, well, his money's been doubling up because he hasn't been spending it. And I would take his money. Yes. And he would get so mad.
But those were. I mean, it was a struggle.
But when I say it was a little bit of money, Army, it was like we gave ourselves like an extra $100 a week, and so by the end of the month, he would have $350 and I would have $0 because I was, so I would just take his money. But
I love it. This is actually a really good point. This was not one of the questions I planned to ask you, but I think this is a really good question for our audience. Relative to money, when you guys were married or newly married, I know where you are probably now. You've been together for so long. Did you have one account? Like, how did that work? Because, these days, there are many young people that want to separate accounts. I was always raised that you don't do that. Mm-hmm. Jason and I shared everything from day one. My money is his money is our money. Like you said, you put your little money aside. We've got this extra money to do this, but it was all in one pile. It was all, we had access to everything. How, did you guys do it? Because I think it's interesting that people want to keep everything separate. I don't think I don't support that.
Yeah, no, we always did it the same way. We were literally, when we first got married, we were living check to check. We would get excited if we could rent Netflix movies on the weekends. We were like,
you were going to Blockbuster. There was no Netflix. You were excited if you could go to Blockbuster or not.
Yes.
The first time I went to Blockbuster and tried to get a card, they denied me because my credit was cracked up. Okay, so I've been there, done that. Right out of college, I got a credit card or did something in college. To make a long story short, Blockbuster was a treat.
Isn't that funny? Sure. It was a treat.
Yeah, no, we would apply for credit cards. And they would write us. They would send us a rejection letter with 2 words: ha ha.
You guys put everything together, though. Everything was together.
Everything was together. But I think, but on the one hand, I don't think it has anything to do with money. I think to me that is symbolic. That we are going to ride together here. So having a joint account is symbolic of the relationship, and separate accounts is symbolic of the relationship too.
Steve said having accounts together, that's symbolic of riding together. I am riding with you, for you. We are in this together. Separate accounts sends a different message, which I can't relate to because I don't have a separate account and they don't either. But
let's unpack that a bit more, because that means that you could have 2 different approaches to managing money. But part of riding together is you're going to compromise on what that approach is, since you have one account. See, to me, a separate account is kind of like an escape hatch where you can go and do what you want to do, but I got my own money. I'm going to do what I want to do. And what I've learned is that over time, that leads to other behaviors that they plant seeds. And to me, it's the wrong kind of seed. Now, if we got to fight it out, because we were not on the same page financially initially, but having those, we had no choice but to resolve it because it was coming from the same account. I'm like, girl, I'm saving my money. I turn around, look for the money I'm saving, and it's gone. Because you buying some shoes. It's like, that ain't working for me.
He was not happy with
that ain't working for me. So it forces a certain kind of discipline on you. It's about a different thing. And then this magnified, right? So I went into corporate America after 10 years in admissions, but one of the things I saw happen in admissions, sitting down with families, and they were begging me to try to do something financially to help them afford a place like Boston College, right? So I'm their advocate, and I would go talk to the financial aid office on their behalf. Financial aid office would hand me their finances and say, Steve, they got a vacation home. They've got trust funds. It's not our responsibility to fund them. And that had a real effect on me because I said, whoa. Now, and we didn't have children yet, but I remember thinking, okay, that's got to be our first priority. And it was. So we said, okay, children's education first, so they don't have debt like we did and da-da-da. And then, the other things that we want to do will come a little bit later. So we absolutely, abide by that.
Well, I think we've covered a lot. We've covered quite a lot. And I know, Tonya, I was going to ask you about advice you had for women, young ladies, which you gave great advice about the importance of being vulnerable. And Steve, you did too. That's something all of our young people are working through because they're so anxious right now. It's just, it's a very different world, and they're going to get there. They are going to get there.
It's a different time. Our world was so much smaller.
Yes.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, and it's something that we abide by because I do think it's challenging a lot of the relationships, as you rightly point out. But we say in our home, we say it about each other, but we say it about the five of us. Nobody outside this house is more important than the people inside of it. And we were very conscious to not have other people in our marriage, not our friends, not our parents, or whomever. Like, it was going to be us. And we also made it clear that we weren't going to bring problems or challenges to other people and not, to one another. And I say that in the context of social media and other kinds of influences. I think, to be honest, that's bringing other people into your relationship. You comparing your relationship to the edited lives on social media is bringing another force into your relationship. And you know nothing about what's unfolding in that world. And that's part of riding together, is saying this is a partnership, and we're not going to have other people influencing and impacting. And I vividly remember the week after we got married, Arvia. I wake up, it's like 3:00 in the morning, right? We come back from the honeymoon, all the blah, blah, blah. And now we're living married life. She has moved from New Jersey to Boston that she hadn't even been to before. 3:00 in the morning, I wake up and I look over and she's not in bed. I'm like, well, where is she? So I kind of sit up and hear some noise in the house. Go into the kitchen of the apartment, the one-bedroom apartment that we're in, and she's at the counter and she's crying. And I'm like, did she get a phone call? But it's like 3:00 in the morning. When she get a phone call and she's not prone to emotion like that. And so I said, hey, is everything all right? Now I'm thinking, she regrets that we got married so quickly, da-da-da. But I remember what she said. She says, so what do we do now? We had been on this whirlwind romance, married in less than a year, beautiful wedding, and now she's in another part of the country, away from her family, and we're living together for the first time, right? What we said was, we're going to build this as we best see fit. And that's what we've continued to do.
Yeah, just take it day by day.
And, I don't want to divulge too much of your personal business, but when they talk about pinching their pennies together, getting declined for credit cards, you've got a second home, beautiful home on the Vineyard. You've got a beautiful home in Lake Forest. You've got 3 amazing children, 2, actually, I guess all 3 in college, 1 in grad school and 2 in college. And who would have ever known that day in the apartment when you woke up when you were crying, going, where are we going from here? It is all about support, building together, finding the right person, matters of the heart.
Believing in one another,
Yes, believing in one another. It's not about the shiny things, party people.
No.
Really take time to get to know people.
And it's
not about,
right? Like it's a lot of sacrifice, and Steve was adamant. The one thing that he was adamant about was putting money aside for our kids to fund private education. And we disagreed early on because our kids were little. And I was like, wait, like, I want a bigger house. I want a new car. I need, and he would say, nope, T, we're putting this money aside. Like, trust me, trust me, trust me. And thankfully I did. Like, I'm very glad that he was a planner like that, because he just always wanted to make sure that the kids were squared away, and that we were accomplishing our goals. So, and I think that the other thing that I would say is that, marriage is never 50-50. And I think young people might think, oh, here's my half, here's your half. It's never 50-50. It's not symmetrical. It's, sometimes it's 70-30, other times it's 30-70, but it is 100% all in. It is a 100% commitment. And that's what love is. Love is more than just a feeling, right? It's more than just an emotion. Love is a commitment.
One way that I tried to make this clear. So I write this first book because our kids were asking me where my mother and father were when they were really young. So I write this book, and it explodes. I mean, it becomes a bestseller, and I'll find myself flying to Hollywood because big movie studios want to meet with me about turning it into a film and blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, I go the independent route, right? And the reason I went the independent route is because I realized pretty quickly that Hollywood wanted to tell my story their way. And I was adamant, and I'm going to say this running the risk of it sounding egotistical, but I think it would be clear that wasn't what was driving me. I saw myself as the hero of my story. I had lighthouses, and they were important to me, and I would not have the life that I do without them. But I knew that I was the one who was resolved. It started with me. It had to start with me. They wouldn't have come into my life if I wasn't the one, right? All of a sudden, I find myself on a movie set about my first book. So it's a story about my life. And I'm talking with the producer, and we're negotiating. And I literally said to him, Arvia, I said, the only way I'll work with you is if I write the end of the movie. That's the only way I'll do it. I said, besides, I don't really need to do this, by the way. Like, I already have the victory in Tonya and the children. So I don't need I don't need all of that. So I can say no, right? And he's like, and I can see him looking at me like, hey, I'm the producer, da-da-da. I didn't give a damn about that. But at the end of that movie, you see me, and you see Tonya, and you see Quinn and Vaughn and Kennedy. You see this intact Black family. And that was purposeful. I was purposeful because I, wanted people, young people in particular, to see this is what is possible from somebody once telling you are never going to have a chance in the world. This is what's possible. And I also wanted to try and portray theatrically and cinematically something that is true about the Black community and Black culture, that we are far more family-centered than we're given credit for. And that there, in particular, are a lot of men like me whose fathers were not present in their life, and they were just resolved that they were going to be better men. And they may have had to forgive their fathers for their absence in their life. There's some things, but I'm surrounded by a whole army of dudes just like me who have become better examples than what was around them. That's not always what's depicted and portrayed, though. So here I have this opportunity, and you can best believe I was going to be resolved that that's exactly what you would see. And how that has played out has been amazing to me. Just last week, I get a Facebook message from this man who tells me, he says, me and my wife are having movie night, which we do too, And he says, so we're flipping around. We've seen a lot of shows together. He goes, we stumble across your movie. They watch it. And then at the end of it, he turns to his wife and he says, I know what we have to do now. We have to adopt. So that's what the two of them did. They literally have adopted 3 children because they saw the movie. And at the very end, that scene of seeing this family, and he turns and says, now that's what we got to do, right? That's what we have to do. All the people that you've had, everything that you're trying, that you are accomplishing with DOTTIE in this community, especially in this time of dissonance and discord, where you're presenting, these whole narratives of culture, but also these interactions that transcend things like race and politics. It's so powerful. It's so important. We're not, see, in the final analysis, not just us joining you, but so many others who have joined you, it's really important for young people to see that we're not exceptions. We're actually reflections.
We're not exceptions, we're reflections. That's so beautiful.
Yes. I mean, we love what you're doing, Arvia. It's we've enjoyed listening and watching your other podcasts. It's so important for young people to see, just to believe in the beauty and the power of love and what you can accomplish.
Thank you so much.
The right person behind you.
I really think our young people deserve love, and we need to help them attain it because it's not as easy today as it was before.
No, you're right. I mean, I know you got to wrap up here. It is tougher for that generation. It is. They're judged far more harshly than we were. They have less runway of error for mistakes because they get, publicized, and and so it is, more difficult. But for our generation, me and Tonya and you and Jason and our, we love you, and we have so much hope for you because you have so many skills and you have so much to offer. Don't navigate the world looking for permission. I'm not convinced necessarily that our generation in particular is really in a position to be lecturing this younger generation about the things that elders sometimes like to lecture you about. I see that in my children. I see it in your children, like a lot to offer. So offer it.
Oh, beautiful. Well, we're just so happy that you guys have taken the time to share your story. It's beautiful. Like I said, it brings me to tears every time. I know it's going to move a lot of people. It's going to change lives. Your story changes lives every day. And now hearing your marriage and how all of this has played out, it's wonderful. And oh, by the way, I did not know how scandalous it was. This is also going to be a very juicy podcast episode.
Well, we share that to say to these young people, follow your heart, because all too often you accept something, you're not happy. If you're not happy with something early on, you're not going to be happy 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later. So follow your heart and your intuition because it guides you. It guides you. You just have to be aware and open to listening to it.
Well, what a great way to end. Thank you guys so much.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you, Arvia.
I love you guys.
We
Thank you.
Love you.